Why do you think Kiev won't fall to Russia? What is the circumstances of this fight at the moment that you think favours the Ukrainian people somewhat?
Yeah, no, I think it favors them a whole lot, to be frank. All warfare has a context, and urban warfare has a context, and sometimes we remember different wars. This is going to be a full-on attack of a defended city, more like attacking a fortress walls of ancient times. Uh, Russia messed up and gave Ukrainians time to get ready. I mean, surprise is the number one thing in war, and we saw Russia trying to use that, right? Trying to use speed and surprise to attack along the outskirts of Kiev and secure airfields and things. Now, every road is blocked. There are thousands and thousands of military and volunteers ready for a penetration into the city. And what Russia is trying to do is get into position to surround it and then bomb it, which is pretty much their doctrine. And then at some time they're going to try to go in. But at this point, that's just a nightmare situation for Russia. And I would give the odds so much on Ukraine at this point.
John, what happened here? Because on paper, Russia has far superior manpower and tank power and air power. So why did they stuff it up, basically?
So there's so many reasons why they stuffed it up in the beginning. Failure of intelligence, right? So the failure, and to be fair, nobody expected the Ukrainian resistance to be like this. The military has done a great job on stopping Russia from doing what they initially wanted, was a rapid invasion, more like the coalition of 2003. What they also snuffed up is letting, with every moment, every day that Ukraine doesn't lose, they win. Russia is out of time. Russia then allowed the urban defense. The defense is always the strongest form of warfare. They let the Ukrainians prepare to defend the urban terrain. We call the urban terrain the great equalizer for a reason. Once Russian military, no matter how big they are, no matter how military advanced they are, once they enter the urban terrain, any military is degraded. That's why it's called the equalizer. All their guns, their weapons, they need 5 times the troops to any defender that's inside the city. And now there's thousands of defenders. I mean, this is, it's ironic. We talked about David and Goliath. At this point, Ukraine and the cities are the Goliath.
Indeed, you're right. No one expected Ukraine to put up this kind of resistance, but we've seen that. Is there any truth, verifiable truth to reports we've seen that essentially Russian soldiers, their hearts just aren't in it, so they're giving up?
Yeah, so this is what I wrote a book about, right? Soldiers don't fight for dictators. They fight for each other, they fight for a cause, and they fight for their families. Will in battle is everything. So pushing a conscript army, not telling the junior soldiers where they're going, giving them a reason to fight, means that your military will not perform. And look at the Ukrainians. They have all the will to fight. They're fighting for their lives. And to be honest, they're fighting for us. They're fighting for freedom and democracy. I mean, they could literally defeat 3 times of this. Not to say this isn't a scary situation, right? Russia is desperate right now. It's rushing Syrian fighters there. They're bombing civilian cities indiscriminately. That's a scared Russia. They're scared they're going to fail it. And to be honest, I don't see any way they could win in this situation.
John, I found it fascinating looking, of course, at your book, but on your tweets as well. You've essentially been tweeting a play-by-play of what Ukrainian civilians should be doing as this urban warfare becomes even more entrenched. What have you been telling them to do?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, I don't want to see civilians armed, but I also didn't like just telling civilians to go out and resist. That's pretty much suicidal. But if they don't use the urban to their advantage. So as an old soldier who's fought in urban battles before and who's studied this for decades, I started putting out very basics. That one, the objective here is Russia to go inside of Kiev. So step 1 is to build massive barriers. No smart man goes into a fight like that without a tank. So they're taking the tanks apart, but you can also stop a tank pretty easily in the urban terrain with some massive barriers. And then they had to come in with infantry. So never be on the street. And these are kind of the basics that I know from research and from being in urban terrain and how scary it is for the military. So basically the civilians, if they were part of the military fighting, they can turn every street into a nightmare by hiding within the terrain, establishing really strong buildings and in the underground. So that's one of the disadvantages for Russia that we're not talking about. Kiev has kilometers and kilometers of underground. In urban warfare, the underground has always been the refuge. So I put out, hey, make sure you're looking down. I would put every piece of weapon, everything I value, my family, my weapons, everything underground, because underground, you can survive massive bombings. I mean, it's crazy, the underground that's there and can be used. You can pop up behind the attacker. You can survive any amounts of bombings. That bombing's coming. We haven't seen even a taste of it.
But John, if Russia and Putin get more desperate, will we see the use, and we probably have already seen it, things like vacuum bombs? Can Ukrainians survive underground when these kinds of weapons are dropped?
Absolutely. You can drop them. I mean, one of the biggest bombs we've ever dropped in modern history outside of a nuclear bomb, the U.S. dropped in Afghanistan. Why did we drop it? Tunnel complexes. And it was what they call the mother of all bombs, a Moab. And it, to be honest, I'm sure there are people that survived inside. The networks that are under Kiev, the ancient catacombs, subway tunnels. We know from lots of battles that you can survive any amount of bombing outside of nuclear threshold, which I strongly believe we're not going there.
John Spencer, fascinating to talk to you today, the ins and outs of what is happening and what's going to happen, likely to happen in Kiev. We really appreciate it. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks so much.